Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, the weather may not be that great right now, but I tell you what is hot, the property market. And the news this month is astonishing. In the UK, it's really, really crazy. But we're going to reveal some numbers from the US, which are going to blow your mind.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. These market updates have always been super popular since we started doing them. They've also been dominated in recent months by property prices because there's been so much to say. Well, that is going to continue. There's a lot to say again this month, including with the global perspective, as Rob mentioned, and it really is quite something. So stick around for that. But there's plenty of other stories going on this month that you need to know about as well. So we're going to be bringing them your way very shortly. And then, as Rob also mentioned, the weather's not been so hot recently. But stick around for Hub Extra, where we've got an alternative weather forecast where things are pretty scorching. Before we get into our main topic this week, you may have noticed, you should have noticed, because you should be subscribed to us on YouTube, but we have got a new YouTube video out. The title is Will the Property Market Boom or Bust? This is a topic that we've talked about on the podcast before, but doing it in video format allows us to bring it up to date and allows us to explain some concepts that come across better in that format. So head over to YouTube, you'll find it at Property Hub UK. Watch that video, and while you're there, make sure you're subscribed to the channel because we've got loads more great stuff coming your way.
Now, you may be lying on the beach, whether it's in the UK or elsewhere. If it's elsewhere, lucky you. And thinking up of loads of property questions, and rightly so. Why would you be thinking about anything else on holiday? Well, if you do have a property question or two that you would like answering, well, you're in luck. Because, of course, you have Ask Rob and Rob. If you've got a question that you want answering, then go over to propertyhub.net/ask and leave your message there. It's really easy to do. You can do it via your phone or a desktop computer, wherever suits. Or if you want to go old school and call us and leave an answer phone message, then call 013 808 00035. Really simple. Whatever method suits, go ahead, leave that message and have your question answered by us on Tuesdays with the Ask Rob and Rob show.
Well, it's time for our market update. It's coming up to the time of year that's traditionally a little bit quieter in terms of news and developments, but that slowdown is not in effect yet because there has been plenty happening over the last month that you'll need to know about, and we're going to fill you in right now. So as we always do, Rob, we're starting with the big picture and starting with the aspect that always grabs the headlines, which is property prices, which, no surprise, Rob, don't know if you really need a news story to tell you this, but apparently property prices are going up.
Why have we not covered this, Rob? All right, we may have mentioned it once or twice, and we were pretty happy that we were covering it before the main media. But the main media has caught up, and they are now reporting that house prices are on the up. Now, the first set of data we're looking at comes from the Home Track report, which comes out every month. And they focus mainly on cities, and they're reporting that prices are up 7.3% year on year, which actually is quite a big number, because we've talked in recent weeks and months how areas outside the city centres have been doing really well, but city centres haven't really caught on yet, and therefore there's a potential opportunity in city centres because you could potentially see some sort of reverse ripple where people then start to see value in city centres again because the rest of the market has boomed. And this shows that there are signs of that happening by really strong data. 7.3% in isolation. If we reported that any other year, you'd be going, oh, wow, like that's a huge number. But it's because the market as a whole overall, we've heard some even higher numbers. It kind of just sounds normal now, which is crazy. What is normal, though, that any table is produced, Rob, and Liverpool are top. And it seems that's the case here. UK House Price Index, the 20 city summary, Liverpool number one, with growth of 8.9% year on year. Massive. Belfast in second, and then Manchester third. Sheffield fourth, and Nottingham fifth. And I'll mention sixth as well, because that was in our predictions of areas to watch. Leeds. I think some people are going to think we made this table up because we picked all those areas when we said places to watch this year. Now, that data only takes us up till June. So long way to go, yeah. But we can be semi-smug because we're halfway through the year.
I'll take a bit of semi-annual smugness any day. Belfast in particular on an absolute surge at the moment, so we'll see if that continues. An area that's not been on an absolute surge recently is London. On the Home Track report, London not quite bringing up the rear. There's always Aberdeen to be below you. But London, as we've talked about many times previously, has not been performing well relative to the rest of the country. But there is a sign that this may be turning around. There's a story based on a piece of research from Savills saying super rich buyers are coming back to prime London. Good old super rich coming back to rescue us all. And according to this story, there have been 237 transactions of £5 million plus in the first 6 months of this year, which is 61% higher than the same period 2 years ago. And the reason that it's using the period 2 years ago is that last year was a bit of a funny old year, so you can't particularly draw any comparisons. So why is this relevant? It's only a small number of transactions of people who are not buying particularly representative homes. But this is relevant because of the ripple effect. When you see growth happening in prime London, that tends to ripple out through the rest of London and then go out through the suburbs and so on and so on. The patterns recently have been a little bit different, and we've seen the inner London has been struggling over the last couple of years. So it's possible that this growth in prime London is just like the start of the green shoots, and that will now start to ripple out across the rest of the city. We will see.
I think it is worth highlighting, though, that this is just transaction news. They haven't reported on house prices. So have transactions gone up because the market has softened and now for the super rich there's more value? Never thought I'd say that. And they are now thinking, you know what, I'll get back in. That hasn't been reported. So maybe it's the softening of the market that has interested the super rich again, making investments into London. Savills haven't mentioned house prices and going up or down at all there. And of course, if the numbers weren't that great, you wouldn't expect them to publish it because ultimately this piece of news is a nice PR story. So while transactions are up, we wait to see if house prices in the super rich market recover as well. I know there's going to be many concerned listeners who want to know how the £5 million plus market is doing in central London. So of course, we'll keep you updated.
So London is very much not booming. Almost everywhere else seems to be. And this is not just a UK thing. There was a story in the FT this month coming from a member of the Federal Reserve Board in the US, warning about a potential housing market boom and bust over there. Now, he seems to have not particularly got the memo about inflation, which is something that we've been talking about recently, because he says it's very important for us to get back to our 2% inflation target, but that needs to be sustainable, and so we can't have a boom and bust cycle in something like real estate. Though in fact, as we reported last week, they're kind of watering down / giving up on this 2% inflation target by turning it into an average over an unspecified amount of time that effectively allows it to be anything without it having breached their mandate. But anyway, he seems keen on keeping it, and he's concerned that a house price boom in the US or a house price bust in the US will have an effect on that. I was shocked, Rob, by the number in this story. I've gone through it to try and make sure that's right. I think it is. So what is this boom in the US that he's worried about? I had no idea that this was happening to this extent and tried to make sure that this figure is right, Rob, but I'm still astonished by it. It says, according to data released last week, the median price for sales of existing homes was up 23.6% year on year in May. 23.6%? We thought R7 was all right.
I was stunned. Like yourself, Rob. It's even hard to get your head around those numbers. You know, in 4 years' time, that means property, if it carries on, property prices will double in America. Imagine that if we said to you in the UK, the property that you live in right now or the property that you want to buy will be double the price in 4 years. Well, if America carries on like that, that's exactly what's going to play out. Astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. I know it sounds crazy, but don't fully believe the news report, even though it's been reported in the FT and multiple other news agencies. And we will look into this and bring you more on it. I think we can give you a news story update on the US property market in the coming weeks. Because even though many of us might not be investing there, what happens in the US economically often, very often, impacts what happens here in the UK. So we'll bring you more on this story. But we did report on a news story a few weeks ago where we looked at house prices across the globe. And, you know, the UK, we're talking about big numbers. You know, there's been some double-digit numbers reported, but, you know, like 10 to 11%, nothing like 23.6%. But America and many other countries were ahead of the UK. So we'll bring you more news on this in the coming weeks because with numbers like that, you just can't not pay attention, Rob.
Well, yeah, indeed. When you put things in the global context, what's going on in the UK is far from being an anomaly. And actually, you could frame it quite differently. So there's a big piece in the FT just the other day talking about house prices in the OECD, which is basically a group of the 30 wealthiest nations. And according to this, annual house price growth across the OECD was 9.4%, its fastest pace of growth for 30 years. So you could have a headline saying UK price growth is lagging. It's doing worse than most other rich countries. 9.4% is the average, and there are only 3 countries in the group where house prices are actually falling. Everywhere else, they're massively on the up. And the article goes on to talk about the reasons for this, which is basically the same kind of things you've heard in the UK and a lot of stuff about low interest rates, monetary policy, and all the rest of it. So finally, this is something that people are talking about. Can we finally give up now on the idea that this boom is something to do with stamp duty or even something to do with supply and demand, which has been the reason it's been talked about so much, when it's a global thing where house prices are booming in just about every rich country in the world? It's not because we're not building enough houses. It's because of something else. That's why these inflation episodes are so important. That's what's really going on here.
Supply and demand is one of several things that impact property prices over the long term. But a boom is not caused by a shortage of housing. And if anybody talks to you right now and still is skeptical about, the property market and where it's at right now and doesn't believe it's going to continue, at least for the short to medium term, then pull them out a few news articles and educate them. This is a worldwide phenomenon right now. And this is the start of a boom cycle. And remember, it's just started. Now, in a very short period of time, you're going to have people saying, well, it's about to go bust. And you know what? They could always be right because anything could ever happen. But history tells us that boom cycles don't last a few months. They last years. And when they do happen, often they are worldwide. This feels very 2004 to me. Very 2004. And we know what happened the 5 years from 2004 onwards. So based on that, you would expect huge house price rises to come. We will see. But 2004, that's what it feels like right now based on these numbers.
Okay, we've had lots to say about house prices, and rightly so, that's worth remarking on. But there are other things going on as well. So let's have a little roundup. We'll start with mortgages, where 80% lending is back. There are still not very many 80% loan-to-value products, but every week or so tend to see a news story about a new one. And interestingly, the Mortgage Works, which is one of the biggest buy-to-let lenders, has now reintroduced 80% loan-to-value mortgages, but only for energy-efficient homes. So you can borrow 80% loan-to-value only if you've got an EPC rating of C or above. The rates are not too bad on these, actually. So you can get a 2-year fix starting at 2.49% or a 5-year fix starting at 2.99%. So it's still quite a bit more expensive than being at 75% or a little bit lower, but not bad at all. Why are they restricting it to energy efficient homes? My feeling on this is probably that they don't want to do too much of this, and they want to restrict demand. They don't want to get deluged with applications. And it's a way of putting a restriction in there that limits that and also gets them some PR brownie points because it looks like they're very concerned about the environment. Maybe they are very concerned about the environment. I don't know. But interesting in any case, Rob, that we've gone from a position where immediately after COVID hit, there were barely any mortgages anywhere over the last 16 months or so to a point now where they've been gradually coming back. And we've now got lending happening at rates not just where it was before, but actually higher.
And like property prices trending upwards, I can see mortgage products becoming more competitive and that trend continue to happen. We've talked about this before. We've said that this is what happens in this part of the cycle, that mortgage products become more competitive and competition drives down prices and improves loan to values. So I don't think this is a one-off. I think we will see more and more products offering different types of incentives, different ways to hook you in to try and win more business. It's interesting, though, that they picked EPCs as an angle, though, Rob, because there's news around EPCs that has resulted in a few people emailing you and asking for your opinion on what's going to happen in the future.
That's right, because there is a bill going through Parliament at the moment that's to do with this commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And as part of that, one of the things that they're aiming for is that all privately rented homes should achieve an EPC rating of at least a C by 2028, which is actually not far off at all. And I've had a couple of people contact me being concerned about this because they've got older properties that are basically never going to achieve a C. Or if they did, it would basically involve rebuilding the entire thing and it just wouldn't be practical. So they're concerned about this and go, well, will I actually be able to rent this property out in the future? And the answer to that is don't panic, because the kind of the detail of this gets lost when it's reported. But what it actually says is that all homes should have this rating where practical, cost effective and affordable. So I think the idea is if you can easily do something to improve energy efficiency and get it up to that level, then great, you'll be expected to do so. But if you can't and you can demonstrate that it's not a cost-effective measure, then you won't have to. So I don't think we're going to end up in a position where you're going to suddenly have hundreds of thousands of properties that are just going to sit there because they can't be rented out anymore after 2028. So this bill is still going through. I'm sure more detail will come out in time and we'll cover it when it does. But for now, this is just to say, if you do see this and you've got an older property that is a bit drafty, don't panic.
Now, thousands of landlords have been affected by the Grenfell cladding complication. Basically, a lot of people who own apartment blocks with some sort of cladding have had difficulty selling their property or remortgaging because they are, in their current state, are unmortgageable. And those blocks are being rectified. Now, understandably, lots of landlords are unhappy about this. And just for everyone's knowledge, it doesn't impact new builds. They will come with an EWS1 form, which basically says this building's okay. But lots of apartment blocks that have been built previously have been affected by this. But finally, there seems to be some good news, Rob, for some of those landlords who have been affected.
Yes, there has now been an official government report saying that buildings that are below 18 metres in height shouldn't require these EWS1 forms. And this is something that I think Rick's suggested in the past, but it's now been made official. And the government is now working with lenders to try to stop them from asking for these forms. And apparently HSBC, Barclays and Lloyds have already signed up to this. So there's basically been a bit of confusion because these forms were required in most circumstances. Then it was changed. So the guidance was that it was only in some circumstances, but lenders understandably wanting to cover themselves and sort of keep on asking for them anyway, which is causing issues. But now it seems the message is starting to get through that if you've got a building that's below 18 metres, one of these forms should not be required. That still, of course, doesn't do anything for people who have flats affected in buildings that are above 18 metres in height. And so I think this story has still got a long way to run. But this development is going to take a lot of people outside the scope of the EWS1 regime, which is good news.
And finally, Rob, we are in summer and lots of people, if they can, are trying to go on holiday. And because it's so complicated at the moment to try and get abroad, lots of us are looking to the UK. Now, the UK holiday homes or second homes market has been very, very buoyant. And there's huge competition right now to buy properties in areas that people like to go on holiday. And the Southwest in particular has seen a surge in activity for people looking to get second homes. Now, while it's completely understandable why people would want second homes in those lovely areas, there is a huge impact on those areas for people who live there, because those areas become ghost towns in the winter. And there are lots of news reports on this subject. Obviously, it's very timely at the moment. People are going there on holiday, covering the fact that this really is disrupting the local market and local communities. And it's also pricing locals out of the market, meaning that they're having to relocate away from the area because they simply can't afford to live there anymore. So, Robert, it's got to a point that it's so bad now and so extreme for the locals that councils are being forced to take action, and they're looking at actually banning second home purchases in certain areas in Devon and Cornwall. And I don't know whether they can do that and how long that will take and if it'll ever happen. But it's interesting that they're now talking in those extremes. And it's a really difficult one. I really do feel for all concerned because people do want to get away. They do want the opportunity to have a second home. But it's understandable that communities should be allowed to be communities and not become ghost towns because they're full of second homes.
It's a tricky one, this. I normally, when it comes to property-related things, got quite quick to have an opinion, and that opinion might be right or wrong, but I sort of get there quickly and go, oh, well, this seems like obviously the right thing to do. I don't know about this one at all, because I've generally got an aversion to anything being banned and let people do what they want. But like you say, Rob, you can completely understand the impact that this is having on those communities. So I don't know what the right thing is to do here, but it's understandable that this issue, which has always been around to some extent, has been exacerbated by what's been going on recently and the fact that people are now looking more at holiday homes because they can work remotely more of the time. So it's kind of coming to a head. So it's going to be really interesting to see what different parts of the country decide to do about this and how well they work. But whereas normally I'm very happy to say, put me in charge, I'll sort it out. No, I don't have the answer to this one. So, yeah, we'll have to see how this pans out.
Well, I'm not saying I have an answer, but I was talking to someone about this over the past week. And a potential solution, we've kind of seen this happen before, not exactly the same thing, but similar. And that's with student accommodation. And areas in the country just became student zones, student areas, because properties were bought up to let to students, and then those local communities had to move on, and the community was actually gone. They just became solely student areas. And it wasn't solely because of this, but HMO licensing went some way to reducing the impact of that. And it's almost a halfway house, the compromise. You've got the people who want the second home, you've got the people who want their community, and you can understand why both want those things. And ultimately, I'd side with the community, even over the property podcast. However, the halfway house potentially could be some sort of licensing scheme, which means at some point you might get to a one in, one out system, but it's limited on what's done. Who knows? I mean, my solution may be far too simplistic, and there's probably a lot more to it than that. But I understand why it's causing such frustration in areas where people are attracted to them because they are beautiful. And it must be said in balance, while I've just said, you balance towards communities, areas like this are reliant on the economic activity of those people who go to those areas, who spend lots of money, more money than the locals would. So again, it's not as simplistic as ban all investors, because if you ban all the investors, you kick them all out, you remove all the second homes, you remove a large part of your tourism activity. No easy answer. Maybe a compromise is the way to go. Normally, a compromise is the way to go with most things.
Before we wrap up the show then, let's bring you Hub Extra, where we always give you that little bit more. It could be a tool, could be a resource, could be a quote, something to think about, but we always leave you with this at the end of the podcast, and then we back it up with the Hub Extra email that hits the inbox of Property Hub members every Friday morning. So if you're not a Property Hub member, go and sort that out. Just go to propertyhub.net. It's completely free. You get access to all our courses and lots of other good stuff, as well as receiving the Hub Extra email on a Friday. This week, we're bringing you a tool which we'll link to in the show notes, and it's called Propcast, which bills itself as the house selling weather forecast. So it's quite fun. It's kind of playing on the idea of a hot market. So it gives you a weather map of the UK showing you the temperature. And the idea is the hotter the market, the quicker and easier it should be to sell your home. And tying it back into what we talked about at the start of the market update, put on your sun cream, Rob. Pretty much everywhere in the UK is scorching right now.
Yeah, there's only a few areas in the UK where it's not red hot. It looks like London and a couple of tiny spots in Wales. I don't know what's happening in Wales, but we've covered London today, so we know what's happening there. So we may have not had the hot weather in the UK, or not a lot of it anyway, but the property market is hot. So whack your factor 50 on if you're looking to buy at the moment. It's quite cool though, because you can type your postcode in and get a more detailed report. Apparently it's a seller's market where I live, but I'm pretty sure whatever postcode you type in, it's going to say that. 59 degrees currently where I am. Unfortunately, not the real temperature. Well, in fact, 59 degrees would be awful, but 59 degrees for the property market. I don't know exactly how it's assessed to be that exact temperature, but we can just assume that it's hot. It's a bit of a long domain to guide you to, so if you want the exact link, you can go to our show notes, where you'll find at thepropertyhub.net/podcast.
So that is us done for this week. Hope you enjoyed the market update this month. Do let us know on the socials if you've got any comments on anything that we've talked about this week. We are at Property Hub UK. And we're going to be back next week, of course, with 2 brand new podcasts. There's Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday, and then the Property Podcast, as always, the fixture of your Thursday. So until then, have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.